This is complex. What we're talking about is concepts that you never deal with anywhere else, you know? Yeah. All right, let's get back into it. We're still missing one. Missing two. Well, they've now taken double the allocated break time. Okay, coming back onto the front of this sheet here, I want to start by talking about non-destructive editing. People think Photoshop is an amazing program. Wow, Photoshop's amazing. I don't really think it's that amazing. At its core, Photoshop can really only do two things. Okay? It can take a pixel or a group of pixels and change the tonal or color values of those images, of those pixels, right? So it can make it darker, lighter, or change its color. Yeah? No, this is still the original image that I've got. Yep. So Photoshop at its core is actually a very basic program. All it can do is take a pixel or a number of pixels, change its tonal value or its color, and then there's really only one other thing that it can do, and that is change the position of that pixel. That's all Photoshop is really doing any of the time. But when we do this to selective groups of pixels and in special ways, that's when you can do some amazing things. Yeah? But at the end of the day, this is all you're doing. Moving pixels around and changing their values. We've already seen how important it is to be conscious of pixels when we're sizing and resizing and outputting to different things. But we also now need to be aware that Photoshop, sadly, is a very destructive program. So, picture this. It's Friday afternoon. The big boss has sent you through a photo and asked you to Photoshop it a bit. You know, take off that pimple off my face, or change the color. Why did I wear that purple shirt on that day? It looks terrible in the photo. Fix it up for me. And you're like, excellent. I went to Ben's Photoshop class. I can do this. We've got it. But if you do it in the wrong way and you stuff it up, that can be it. So say, you know, let's say the only copy of that image came to you on a USB and you opened it up and you did some stuff and you saved it and you went home on Friday and you came back on Monday and you're like, oh, oops, I like pulled the resolution down to 72 pixels, or I accidentally stuck the dean's head on that guy's head. If you do something like that, if I save this and close this now, I can't fix it. It's completely ruined. So not only have I cut the dean's head out there, but if I come back over here and I'm like, oh, it's okay, I'll just grab his head and I'll move it back. No. So we can be, I hope no one's watching. We really can get into trouble with Photoshop because it's destructive. Let me show you a few other ways that I can that I can not fix it, that I can ruin it. Really simple one. Okay, so that was one example of ruining an image. I cut something out and I stick it over there, it's like it's got super glue on the back of it. Imagine you had a photo and you cut out a bit of it and it had super glue on the back of it. And you put it down on another part of the image, it's never coming off. And if you do rip it off, you've lost what's underneath. Here's another really simple way to ruin an image. I grab my image and I go, right, I want to make that image. I'm going to scale it down and make it really small. What's going on there? Right, going to make my image really small. Excellent, great. And then I'm like, oh, that's a dumb idea. It's okay, I'll just make it big again. Eek. When I scaled it down, effectively removing a bunch of the pixels, Photoshop got rid of them permanently. It was like, I'll just throw out, I'll forget any of those pixels ever existed. And when you're like, Photoshop, no, we need to go bigger again. Photoshop's like, it's okay, I'll make them up. And you're like, no good. Okay, this is scaling something down and scaling it back up is the same as starting with a low-res image and trying to scale it up. We're asking Photoshop to make up pixels, and the Dean's not going to look very happy if he looks like that on the cover of RMIT Weekly. Okay, now what I do have is this thing over here. It's called the history, right? And the history records everything that I do. But remember, it's Friday afternoon. I've done this, I've saved it, I come back, it's like I'll fix it on Monday, the history's gone, erased forever. The history is only there during that session that you're working on. Yeah? So that's pretty scary. If I try to undo what I did, so Control Z, you know, to undo. Let me go back to a spot where we'll see it happening. Okay, so if I try to undo, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, it just goes back and forth. If I do that in Illustrator, it goes back, 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 back. I can go all the way back to the start. Okay, so in Photoshop, all I've got is this history to work with, and I just click on this like this to go back. But if I come back on Monday, there's no history left to work with. So we need to be really careful. Another way that I can ruin my image. Up here, image adjustments. Look at all of these great things that I've got that I can do. Color balance, black and white, levels, all of these cool things. If I use any of these, they're completely destructive. So if I go in and make this image black and white, for example, the color's now gone. I can't get, I can go back in the history today, but if I come back tomorrow, it's all over. So I can't actually use any of these things up here under adjustments. Isn't that crazy? Crazy. Okay, so what do? We're talking about non-destructive editing. This is the way we want to approach Photoshop. You want to keep that in the back of your mind all the time. The key to non-destructive editing is this, the layers palette. Our other Adobe programs have got layers, but they're nowhere near as vital as they are in Photoshop. In Photoshop, if you're not using layers, you're not doing it properly. Now, down the bottom here, there's a bunch of little icons. Some of these, you can kind of figure out what's going to happen. The little trash can, that's going to delete a layer. This little page turning thing, that means make a new one. You'll see that all throughout Adobe. That'll make just a new layer. The little folder, that'll make a folder that I can put some layers into just for organization. Over here, there's a link that will link some layers together. Effects, that will add effects to layers. Okay, so all of those ones kind of make sense. That leaves two in the middle that won't make sense to you by looking at them. And these two things here, in my opinion, are probably the two most important things in Photoshop. So the first one here, the circle divided in two. So I've just grabbed my layers palette. You don't have to do this. I've just done it so you can see it easier, dragged it up. But you can leave yours right where it is, or you can move it if you want to. When I click on that little circle there, see what I've got here? Brightness, contrast, levels, curves, exposure, hue, saturation. Have a look back up here under the adjustments menu. Brightness, contrast, levels, curves, hue, saturation. They're all the same things. When I do them up there, it's destructive. If I do it down here, if that stops lagging, when I do it down here, it's non-destructive. Because what happens if I come down here and choose brightness contrast? I'll move this out the way. It's put that brightness contrast adjustment on its own layer. A layer that I can turn on and off. A layer that I can go back to and edit. A layer that I can delete if I want to. This layer where I'm making an adjustment is aptly named an adjustment layer. Okay? And this is, some people would call this advanced. I would just call this essential. Adjustment layers are the way to make adjustments in Photoshop. Let's have a go. Let's do a really, really basic one. So at the bottom of your layers palette, click on the circle and let's choose brightness contrast. And grab that brightness slider and push it up to make it brighter or down to make it darker. Have a go of that contrast slider there. There we go. I've just made the image look funky by turning up the contrast of it. Yeah. Okay, so I've just done a brightness contrast adjustment. Now I can close off that properties panel, or I can just leave it there. What did you do? Yeah, so what we can do, you can just select that, and you can just delete it. Yep, and that's the beauty there of adjustment layers. Let's do it one more time, and there we go. Okay, so now this adjustment layer here, if I don't like it or if I want to see before or after, I can use a little eye beside it, turn it off, turn it on. If I feel that I've gone too far with it, I go back and I double click on the little circle there, and that will take me back to my properties where I can say, right, I'm going to pull the contrast back a little bit or make the image a bit darker. And I can go back and change that as many times as I like, and it's not going to affect the image more than once. Adjustment layers. Okay, so brightness contrast, that's a very basic adjustment, and if you've got an image that's a bit dark and you just want it a bit lighter, then you can use that. Okay? But let's take it up a notch. Let's look at doing this properly. So I'm going to I'm just going to turn this off. I could delete it, but I'm actually just going to switch it off with the eye and hide it. Now I'm going to pop back into here. So, brightness, these are kind of in levels of advancedness. If I go to brightness and contrast, that's basic. Levels, this is the next step up. Let's have a look at levels. Okay, this thing here is called the histogram, and this shows me the tonal information in my image. Just look at this section here. Ignore this bottom slider, ignore the numbers there. We're just looking at this little mountainous thing here and these three sliders. Shadows, slowing down, it might be the recording. Highlights. And that middle one there is brightness. So what I've got now is independent control over the midtones, which is brightness, the shadows, how black I want my blacks to be, and my highlights, how white I want my whites to be. Midtones. Now, let's go and open up a different image and look at how histograms can differ. What have I got? Okay, there's one in there called increased contrast. Picture of a building. Okay, in the layers palette, into the little circle, down to levels. Now, histograms are like thumbprints. Every one is different and unique to its image. See how this image looks a bit low in contrast? We call it flat. Now look at the histogram. See how the black isn't touching the information there. I can do this up here a little. Okay? And the white also isn't touching the information. So what we're going to do here is correct the contrast. And I do it just by taking the white slider and moving it to where the information starts. Taking the black slider and moving it to where the information starts. I've now just corrected the contrast. What does that mean? This means that now the whitest part in my image is actually white rather than being grey. And now that the blackest part in my image is actually black rather than being a dark grey. I can turn the eye on and off and see how it just kind of lifts that blanket of greyness out of it. This is the beginning. Now, so that's that's correcting the contrast. Now I can push the contrast if I want to. If I want the contrast to be higher, I can get that black slider and I can keep going, making it punchier. I can get that white slider and push it through. But these are like goalposts. Whatever falls outside of them is being pushed out of my image. So if I take that highlight slider and push it to there, all of this information that's outside is lost tonal information in my image. Where do you reckon that tonal information was in the image? What's disappearing? Yeah, the sky. See, I had some tonal information in there. I could just see some clouds. If I push this up here, that's now 100% white, and all of that detail's been lost. Be very careful. This is called blowing out your highlights. Be very careful about blowing out your highlights. Think about what happens when we print an image. Okay? When we print an image, we put ink down on the page. How do we print white? We don't put any ink there. Yeah? White is the absence of ink. It's the paper coming through. So if, and I'm just going to pop back to this one. If say on this one, I take that slider and I push it, now where is that tonal information that I'm blowing out? It's on people's faces, right? See how it goes pixel, 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 stop, no pixels. When I print this, that's going to be even more extreme. It's going to be ink, 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 and then there's going to be a big line and then no ink. And it's going to look really bad. So when you're doing this, you always want to avoid blowing out your whites. You can push the blacks, it just means more things are going to be totally black. That's okay, but be very careful with your highlights. Okay, so contrast, what we're doing there is we're adjusting the contrast, and then that mid-tone slider is brightness. And you just adjust that by eye. How much do you want to lift that up in there? That's a tonal adjustment. Let's do another one. File open. Get the one called clipped blacks. Those dudes standing out in front of something. Now before we even go into it, what do you reckon that histogram is going to look like? Where are we going to see a lot of information? Let's have a look. Yeah, on that left side. So I'm going to go in, open levels, and well look, it's actually spread quite across. But see how there's a big spike of information pushed right up against the black. This image is already, the blacks are already clipped out. That's already pushed. And notice you can't pull those sliders back to decrease the black. Yeah? So if you get an image like this where the blacks are clipped, or if it came in like this with the whites already blown out, that's something that you can't fix with Photoshop. If the image looks like that, you really can't do anything with it. That's one of the limitations. So with an image like this, I would really just be seeing what I could get by lightening it, and I'm getting a little bit of detail back in there, and then I would maybe give that a bit of a push just so it's got some contrast back in, and I would be very careful about pushing those whites. What am I losing? The first thing I'm losing is this information up here, and I don't really care too much about that. If that's getting the faces looking better, but I don't want to start blowing out all of that there. Okay, so this is the same. This is exactly the same as brightness contrast, but you've got more information and more control. Okay, so you can make a more informed decision about it. Let's do. Okay, yep, we're doing okay. Going back in. Right, there's one down here, the last image. It's called Warm Up. Let's go and open that. Oh, did that happen for anybody else? Did it say it couldn't open it? Okay, good. See how this image looks kind of cold and grey? Yeah? It's actually looking blue. Yeah, there's a bluey greyness to it. Now on the little sheet that I gave you, I stuck in there, and you'll find a better version of it in your booklet as well, but there's a little colour wheel there. If you've got your booklet, I've got a slightly different one here. Did they make them around? Did anyone miss out on a booklet? Everyone got one? Okay, is it on page 16 and 17 for you guys? So we're looking just a very small bit of colour theory here. We're talking colour modes. There are two colour modes that you need to be aware of. One is RGB. What does that stand for? Red, green and blue. What is this colour mode used for? Screen. Cheat. Stop cheating for 1 second. What's the other colour mode? Oh no, you can cheat for that. The other colour mode. CMYK. We've heard of this, yeah? What's it for? That's what the colours are. And someone whispered what it's for. It's for print. That's right. So if you take your image can either be, it can be in either of those colour modes. And you can change it. You can just go in and choose a different colour mode. CMYK for print, RGB for screen. And if you use the wrong colour mode, you can run into trouble. If you take a CMYK image and put it on the web, it can go wacky. I've seen greens go pink, reds go yellow, can just go all over the place. RGB. When you do your save for web in Photoshop, it'll fix that for you. Regardless of what colour mode it is, it's always going to output it as RGB. Yeah, you'll just get blocked. It's not right. Likewise, if you try and send an RGB image to print, you might get a phone call from your printer going, hey, idiot, wrong. No, because you're like, what? It's no, you don't know what you're doing. When we print things, regardless of whether it's on a laser printer or going off to an offset printer, they're doing it by mixing cyan, magenta, yellow, and black inks together. So these are our two colour modes that we've got here. RGB, CMYK. I've got the RGB one coming out of blackness, right? RGB is light. So if we turned off all the lights in this room and pulled the blinds, and I got a red, a green, and a blue light, and I hit them on the wall, and I cross them over like this, this is what would actually happen. So where my red and green light crossed over, it would create yellow light. Green and blue would create cyan, red and blue would create magenta, and if I crossed red, green, and blue over together, I would create white light. This is what's happening in here. Anytime you're looking at a colour screen, you're looking at red, green, and blue light being mixed together. So when you see white light on your screen, you're actually looking at 100% red, green, and blue light mixed together. Over here, I've got the CMYK on white because we print onto white paper. And as we cross those over, as I cross over cyan and yellow, I get green. Magenta and yellow, I get red. Cyan and magenta, I get blue. If I cross them all over, I get a murky brown colour. So that's why we had to add in black as well. And we end up with the 4-colour print process. It's the same thing that's going on in our laser printer as what's going on down at the big fancy printing press. Okay. Why are we talking about all this? Well, it's essential that you know for output, but we're about to now go in and start editing colours, and we need to know this colour wheel here. Okay? We need to know this. Who knows what a complementary colour is? Yeah, that's right. So even though this isn't strictly a wheel the way it's laid out, this is a wheel. Look at the complementary colours. Opposite blue is yellow. Opposite red is cyan. Opposite green is magenta. Got it? Okay. Now, I'm going to get you to do this in a second, but let me just demonstrate how this relates now in Photoshop for you. When I'm in my levels, I can drop down this RGB panel and I can go into my individual color channels. This is the red one, and if I grab this and move it one way, my image will go red. You can just watch this, I'll get you to do it in a second. If I go the other way, what color is it going to go? Cyan. See? Red, cyan. Okay. If I I go down to green, moving one way, it's going to go green. The other way, it's going to go magenta. And finally, once my computer catches up, I've got blue and yellow. Regardless of which tool you use to edit colour in Photoshop, this is the principle that it's working on. So you kind of want to remember, if you can, those complementaries. Keep going back and looking at that until you get it. Because what I've got here is an image that is cool, okay? Which are my cool colours in there? Blue. Yellow is warm. And cyan is cool. Red is warm. Green, magenta are weird. They sit on this funny line. And we actually, when we're doing this, we forget about green and magenta. Most of the time when you're correcting colour, you do not touch green and magenta. Yeah? So, what we want to do is take this image that looks a bit cool, we want to pull out some of the cool colours, and we want to push in some of the warm colours. So let's have a go. Has everyone got this image open? Okay. We're going to make a levels adjustment layer. So in layers, pop down and make a levels adjustment. Now, if we need to make a tonal adjustment, we should do that first. So see how the black isn't quite touching the histogram? I'm going to get that and I'm just going to give that a little push until it is. The white is already pressed up against the side, and you can see over here the white is already blown out, so I don't want to push that any further. Is the image too dark or too bright? If so, grab the mid-tone slider. I'm going to lighten my image a bit. Sorry, I was in the wrong spot. I'm going to lighten my image a bit there, just so I'm getting a bit more detail. Okay, now, colour time. Click on this drop down that says RGB. And let's go to red. By the way, I've got notes and videos on this, so don't freak out if this goes over your head a little bit. I'm also recording this session. So, for this trick, we're only going to use the mid-tone slider. Grab that mid-tone slider under red, push it to the left until your image looks red. And now, gently pull it back until that red just disappears. Now we're going to completely ignore the green channel. We're going to come down to blue. This time I need to remove blue. If I go to the left, I'll make my image more blue. I want to go the other way. So I'm going to pull it to the right. Pull it to the right until your image looks yellow. And then ease it back until that yellow disappears. Jump on the little eye down here. Turn it off and on. See the difference? Suddenly the image looks less grim, more friendly, more inviting. You use the magenta channel for that, so just red, that's red, and then just blue, and you remove some blue. Yes, leave the green alone. So, this is a warm-up adjustment, and it's a common one. Often you'll get an image and it just looks a bit cold and grey and not nice. Doesn't feel good. This is a good way to adjust it. You don't want it to look red and yellow. You want to ease it back until it doesn't anymore. But you want it to look nice like that. That's a warm-up adjustment. What do we think? Just want to go back and do a couple of really basic things. We can do it right here on this image. Go and grab your crop tool. It's the 5th tool down there. Now, as soon as you select that tool, your crop will become active here. So I can do a very basic manual crop and just pull the edges and the sides in, whatever I want that to look like. Ugh. This computer. Yours won't be jumping around like mine is. Okay, and when you're happy with that, you can just hit enter or you can click on the little tick up there and that will do your crop for you. It's a very basic function that you might want to perform. Let's go to edit and undo that crop. Now, you can, if you have a look up here in your options bar, now this options bar changes for every tool that you select. So as you select a different tool, you get different options related specifically to that tool. So if I click on where it says ratio, I've got all different ways, including presets that I can use to crop to a certain size. But this one here, the second one, is probably the most important. Width by height by resolution. So here I'm going to put in my width and my height and my resolution. If you know that you need an image to be a certain size, this is how you want to do it. So I want this image to be 10 centimeters. Okay. Now it will be using whatever the default dimensions for that document are, but you can change those units as well. I'll show you that in a second. Okay, I want it to be 10 centimeters by 5 centimeters. And now the resolution, let's say I'm going to go to print on this one. I want that to be 300. Can anyone see something that's a real problem here? Her, you don't like her face? Or the other one, this one? They're both kind of greasing herself, aren't they? Okay. It really is the pixels per centimeters. I've never met anybody, I've never come across anywhere in any tutorial or anything, I don't know who's using pixels per centimeter. We've got the option there and somehow, are you guys on pixels per centimeter as well? Oh my God, Adobe, what's happening? If you didn't notice that and you went ahead and did that, your resolution would be, I can't even do the math in my head to figure out which way it's going to go, but it's going to be wrong, wrong, wrong. This has to be pixels per inch. We do not work in pixels per centimeter, ever. Okay, once I've got my crop there, which might include trying to crop out grumpy girls off the side as well. It's going to be tight there with this crop dimension. Yeah, up there we go. I can just get rid of her. And I'll just have these guys' heads and then those guys in the background. And it looks like everyone's engaged and having a good time. Okay. Now I'm going to hit enter or hit the little tick. Oh, no, look what happened. When I changed it, I didn't even go back and, gee, I've got to be careful about that, don't I? So I'm going to go back and I'm going to go back to my history here and go back before the crop. I've got to get out of that crop because I'm stuck in a crop. Don't crop. Oh, it's all going terribly wrong. When I changed that, it converted my number. So that's the resolution I would have ended up with had I have cropped it at 300 pixels per centimeter. I want 300 pixels per inch. Crop out my grumpy girls again. I love that you identified that as the current problem. Now, see what happened when I hit crop? What happened to my image? It shrunk. This is giving me some really important information here. See, as I did it, it didn't just crop it, but it also went smaller. The fact that this went smaller is really important. You can stretch it out. Were you hitting enter? Yeah. It's being fussy. It's doing it for you as well. Yep. It does because you put your dimensions in there, and so it's lost the proportion. Yeah, that's deliberate. Okay, the fact that my image went smaller when I cropped it is a really good and important thing. What are you two troublemakers doing? Okay, click on the plus. That'll take you in. Now, you did what I did. You just cropped yours to 72. So let's just undo it. Control Z. Yep. 300. Yep. And then you can crop that down. What you need to be careful of when you're doing this is if your image suddenly goes bigger, let me show you. If, let's say I left all of those there, but I cropped this to 600 and said, okay, my image would go bigger. What's happening here? Yeah, it's putting more pixels in there. I've told Photoshop to push it. This is actually exactly the same as going to image size and bumping up the resolution. Yeah, if I'm asking it to have more pixels than it's got, Photoshop's going to make them up, and we know what the problem with that is. How do I check if I'm okay with it? I go and view my image at 100%, and I go and look at, something like somebody's face, and I make a judgment call as to whether that's okay or not. Okay? So just be careful of that. So you can just pop that history out there. It's this little one here. Yep, you can pull it down so you can see it a bit easier like that. Let's do a fun one. File, open. There's one in there called perspective crop. This building. Perspective crop. If you're still on your crop tool as I was when I went in there, it's initiating a crop. You can, if you hit escape or if you just go and choose a different tool, that'll get you out of that. Now, go and press on the crop tool and you'll open up the tool set. Press your mouse down on it. And in there, I want to get this tool called perspective crop. Choose perspective crop and just drag that crop over it. Hit escape. Start again. Okay. So this This is really good. I'll tell you the most common thing I use this for if I'm documenting artwork, right? Say someone's done a drawing or a painting or something and I photograph it, but I've hit it on an angle where it's not square on. Yeah, I can use this to bring it square again. But this is also a classic example of this. So let's grab the top corners of this now and drag them in until this line becomes parallel with the edge of the building. And do the same with the other side as well. Have you got the perspective crop tool? And now drag. Yep, that's it. Just click on it. Yep, now click and drag on this. Yeah, it's just a visual thing. Yep, so just click and drag over it to initiate it. And then keep going over the whole thing. And then bend that in there. Just like that. When you've got those edges parallel, that's it. Hit enter or hit the tick. We've really forced the perspective of this building out, so it might look a little fake. But you can use this, you'll have an opportunity to use this at some stage. Remember that it's in there. It's fairly simple to use, but it can be really handy. Hasn't changed the size of the image. Yeah, it's confusing.
It looks a bit like a... Did we do that on the layout?
No, we didn't. So what we did is destructive. So maybe, how do we be non-destructive in a situation like this? We save this as a different file. Yep, we do a save as and called it building perspective fix or something like that. Yeah. I could have duplicated the layer, so I could have done this. And this is, this is a good thing to keep in mind. If you are, because we're going to do a bit of retouching in a second as well, and you'll see. But if I wanted to, well, actually, no, the crop's going to do the whole image. Yeah, so I actually have to just save this as a different version. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, but I've just gone to save it, and it says JPEG options, image quality, 10, and you get the option to go max, low, medium, high. I just wonder what, is that just as the utility okay to put it down?
So if you're going to print it, remember what I said before, get that quality slider and put it on absolute maximum.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, remember when I showed you what JPEG compression did? And it broke it into squares and kind of, yeah, that's what that's doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're just using it for web, you can, low is fine.
Well, if you're using it for web, you should use save for web, save it to PNG. If you put it on low, you're going to see it. You're going to see that compression. Let's go into... Let's go back to these guys. Hue Sat resize for print. If you can't see, once you start getting a lot of tabs open, if you can't see everything, if you go to Window, right down the bottom, you get a list of all of your documents there, so you can jump to them in that way as well. I'm just going to turn off that adjustment that I made there. Maybe I'll leave it on. You should still just have it open. Yeah. When we did a save for web, yep, that's right. When you do a save for web, it spits that file out. It doesn't open it. So you're left with the original open. Who's this guy? Do we know? No. Okay, I mentioned this before. Now they're going to use this for some promotion. Maybe they're going to send it over to RMIT Vietnam. I'm making crap up here. Okay, maybe in Vietnam, if you wear a purple shirt, it means you're unlucky, or something like that.
Some Chinese.
Chinese?
There's a sound
Death.
yeah.
Right. Okay.
There you go. So he's not making it up, nothing.
There you go. Well, I am. I just happen to be landing some. Okay, so marketing department has clicked on this and gone, you can't be wearing that purple shirt. That's the Chinese are going to take that as bad luck, and this is going to China. Can you please change the color of that shirt? And by the way, that pink tie is awful as well. Can we do something about that? Okay, let's look at when we've been making adjustments so far. We've been making global adjustments, meaning over the whole image. We want to now look at making local adjustments, meaning on a part of an image. And the way to do this is by making a selection. So let me quickly show you some selection tools. There's the rectangular marquee, where I can select like this. And if I make a selection like that, and then go ahead and make a levels adjustment, I'll just be adjusting that part of the image. Yeah? Local adjustment. I'll get rid of that. Okay, so I've got a rectangular marquee, I've got an elliptical one. Now, if I hold shift as I use these things, they'll be perfect squares, perfect circles, they'll be constrained. Here I've got a lasso, which is a freehand selection. Okay? Actually more useful than you might imagine. The polygonal one, which kind of works like this, so I can do straight line freehand selections. And then we start getting into the smart selection tools. So this one here is called the quick selection tool. And I'm hoping with this I'm going to control plus till I zoom in. I'm going to hold my space bar and so I can pull that over to this section here. And now clicking on the layer that I want to make a selection on in my layers palette, I'm going to paint down here and I'm going to select his shirt. And I select inside the area and it jumps to find the edges. So I'm doing this in little bits because if I keep going all in one go and I go too far, when I undo it, I'm going to lose too much. So I do it in little passes. And this tool is pretty good at making selections. But inevitably, at some stage, it's going to jump out like this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit there. Now, when you're making selections, there's two shortcuts that I want you to know. The first one we're going to use is the Alt key. See how at the moment this has got a plus inside it, this little tool? When I hold Alt, it gets a minus. So now I can remove that bit there that I didn't want. And when I let it go, it's got the plus on it. I'm going to get in there. Now, another shortcut. This selection tool is a brush. There's lots of brush tools in all the Adobe programs. Paint brushes, selection brushes, all sorts of brushes. Have a look at your keyboard. See the P? See the square brackets next to the P. With that, you can tap your brush and make it bigger and smaller. Have a go. So come and grab this selection tool, your quick selection tool. And make sure you don't have your caps locks on, by the way, because otherwise you'll just see that. And then you can go bigger and smaller. So in order to get into those smaller areas, I'm going to need to make that brush quite small so I can get that area in there. What it was? Not really. It's something that you're kind of changing all the time. Yeah. see how you go. Now, check your layers palette. Have you got your background layer selected? It's going to work much better if you click on the layer where your image is, which will be called your background layer. So select it. That's it. Click on, just take a quick look here, guys. If you've got this, look at my layers palette, I've got my levels selected. I want to click on the background, and that's going to focus in on that more. Good, selecting. Good. Good. Yep, so zoom in a little bit. Yep, and finish it up. You need to get that. No, just paint over that. No, with that. That's that. Yep, that's it. And then I'm going to do that as well. That's it. Yeah, good. And then you want to remove the little pinches next. So that's when you hold the Alt key. Reduce it further. Okay. And so you just, this bit you just want to remove. You hold Alt. You don't want to paint over the shirt. Just want to paint over that. Yeah, if you hold it that back, see over here in your layers palette, on the background. That'll make it work for you. So that's there. Then with Alt, you remove. Good. Good. Start again. If you want to start again, you want to deselect. Go to the select menu up the top and choose deselect. Handy shortcut, Control D.
What happens if you've got a section that you minus and then it doesn't load? So before it was going in.
You're probably painting over it. Yeah. So using, don't press the P, just use the square brackets to change the size of your brush. Bigger, smaller. Okay? Yep. Okay, so now we've made a selection. Making a good selection takes time, takes practice. Yeah, we haven't got much time, so we'll go with the rough selection. But the trick is you don't need to get this perfect at the start either. You can come back and fix it later. So wherever your selection's at the moment, what we're going to do now is make a new kind of adjustment layer. So go to your layers palette, come down to where we get our adjustment layers from. We've used levels. We want to use Hue Saturation now. Hue Saturation allows us to change the color of things. Grab that hue slider.
So did you say we're still on background or on it automatically creates?
That's right. Yep. As you change that hue slider now, you change the color of his shirt. What? Let me just clean it up. Okay, so hue is color. Saturation, so let's say green's good luck, isn't it? Isn't green a lucky color? I'm going with green's a lucky color. So I'm going to go for a lucky green shirt. How lucky do I want him to be? There's your saturation. Really lucky? Subtly lucky. Yeah? So saturation is how much of that color is there. If I pull that all the way down, it will be grayscale. If I put it all the way up, it'll oversaturate and it'll look crazy. Okay? So you can change the color of anything just like that by selecting it and then adjusting the hue and saturation. You can use the lightness, but see how it looks really bad? So if you want to make something lighter or darker, I recommend you don't use the lightness there, but rather go back and use levels. Okay? So we'll give him, you can choose whatever shirt color you want him to use there. Now, making selections and making adjustment layers, we are just starting to knock on the door now of advanced Photoshop. We're just going to take a little peek into it, okay? Because you don't really have to think about it much more than that on a base level. To understand it properly can unlock some really powerful things, but it does get a little bit more complex. Let's do another type of local adjustment. Let's say, not that it really needs it here, but let's just do it anyway. Let's say I want to lighten or darken somebody in here. So maybe, let me just see quickly if there might be